Hi, and welcome back to Social Cognition. In this round, we will talk about social comparisons. We will clarify, first of all, what social comparisons are, when we compare ourselves socially and why, and also with whom. And we will also ask if we always compare and what happens when we compare, and also how we feel when we compare ourselves. To get us started, I want to ask you the following questions. How much are 10 euros? How long is an hour? How warm are 15 degrees centigrade? And then also some other questions. How smart are you? How well did you do in your last exam? Do you have many friends? And do you do lots of sports? Well, I think the answer to all of these questions, pretty hard to say. Because what's the standard? Are 15 degrees centigrade warm compared to what? So this is what social comparisons are about. It is comparing yourself socially against some kind of a standard that other people set. Let's get started with the similarity hypothesis in social comparisons. Here, this is about basically making the hypothesis that people want to be similar to those who are better off and want to be dissimilar to those who are worse off. Now, imagine the following scenario. This is what we would call the rank order paradigm. Imagine that you are tested for your mental flexibility. That's a trait that we generally positively value. And you are given your score. And out of 10 people, you rank 5 out of, it's out of 9 people, you rank 5 out of 9. So, you have 12 points, and out of the 9 people, you are the 5th. Now, which 2 other scores would you like to see? Pause for a moment here and think about which 2 other scores you would want to know. Okay, so this is the setup of a study by Wheeler et al., where also this rank order paradigm was used. And here we have some data about this. So it's not only one person who was asked, but actually a bunch of participants. And what we can see here is, again, the same rank order. So the participant would be ordered as 5th out of 9, where G would have the highest score and participant B, whoever that might have been, had the lowest score. So when asked about a positive trait like mental flexibility, and without being given any information about the possible range of scores, the information that participants asked to see was the score of the best and the worst person. So you can see that is in the first column. This is the percentage of participants who wanted to know the information from the person scoring highest first, about 80%, and then the second most popular, second people asked about the person with the lowest score. So in this case, if you don't know anything about the range, often people just try to figure out what the range actually is going to be by first trying to figure out what the highest and the lowest numerical score would be, and that gives us some frame of reference for where our personal score of 12 would be landed. Okay, but if we already know the score, the range of the score, given that still we're talking about a positive trait, so let's say still about our mental flexibility, what is the information that participants are interested in the most then? Well, you can see from this column here that then participants are interested in the person who scores the highest, similarly to the case when there was no range given, but also the person who was just better than them. So it's interesting to us to find out what people do who are slightly better than us, first of all. And then second up, what you will see is that people were also interested in finding out what the people scored that were just below them. right? So that would be the second piece of information that people would also be interested in. But now, let's put yourself into the shoes of the subjects in our experiment again. And let's say that instead of testing you for mental flexibility, which we positively valued, let's say we test you for mental rigidity, something that you value negatively. So again, you are giving your score and you rank 5 out of 9. Which 2 scores would you like to see now? Pause for a moment and think about this. Now, let's see what our participants said in this study. Okay, so first off, for the range condition, so the negative trait and there's no range given. Again, people are mostly interested in first establishing the range, to trying to find out what is the worst possible score and what's the best possible score. But when the range is given, and now this is the last column here, then what is the information that participants are most interested in? Well, first and foremost, they're interested in finding out the score of the person who scored the worst and the score of the person who's just below them in the rank. So if it's about a negative trait, then we try to compare ourselves in a benevolent way to the people who are worse than us, so we can feel a bit better about ourselves, right? And only after that are we interested in who scored a little bit better than us. Okay, so you can see that the direction of comparison here depends on whether we're looking at a positive trait, something desirable, or at a negative trait, something that's not desirable. So in the rank order paradigm, what we can learn is that first, what people do is they try to confirm the boundaries of the scale in which they are measuring themselves, and then to confirm similarity with those who are better off, and to confirm dissimilarity with those who are worse off. This feeds into the theory of social comparison processes, as you could derive it from Festinger. And this theory posits that people are motivated to evaluate their opinions about situations and their abilities. Here the emphasis is placed on the motivation of reducing uncertainty. So people want to gain reliable information about themselves, and in the absence of objective information, people can compare themselves to others' opinions and abilities. People also, according to this theory, prefer to compare themselves to others who have similar abilities. So if objective information about our performance is provided, does it mean we would no longer compare ourselves to others? Here, we can take a look at absolute versus relative performance. We can provide absolute, so objective standards of performance versus relative standards of performance that are kind of subjective and relative to others. So let's say you get a 7 out of 10 on an exam, that would be an absolute way of expressing your performance. Or let's say you have 150 friends on Facebook, that's also an absolute way of expressing your friendship performance, kind of. If I tell you that you got a 6 in your exam and Tom got a 5, then this would be a subjective type of information, as would be saying you have 120 friends on Facebook and Tom has 19. Yeah, because in this case you can compare yourself to another person. Now the question I would ask you here, so take a minute to pause the video after I've paused it, is when are you more satisfied? To which information are you more sensitive? And which one would make you happier to know? Okay, remember that, and now let's take a look at what the research says. It says that actually there should be 2 important factors here. One of them should be how close the person that you're comparing yourself to is to you, and the other is what kind of a person you are, in particular, what kind of self-esteem you have. Now let's take a closer look at this. In a study about absolute versus relative performance information, participants were asked to work on 2 tests. And they were asked to work on a social sensitivity test and one about aesthetic judgment. And they were asked to do this with a partner, and the partner was either a friend or a stranger. And participants differed in their self-esteem. They were, according to their self-esteem, split into high versus low self-esteem groups. And then participants received some feedback about the task performance. You remember there were 2 tasks, right? And they received the feedback for the first task that they had performed a 6, and their partner had scored also a 6. So there they had relatively performed well, right? So compared to the other, to the partner, oneself is relatively better in this task than in the other task. This is task B, where the absolute score was higher. So participants themselves scored 8, their partner scored 11. But the absolute score is higher, but relative to the partner, here in task B, they score worse, right? So that's how we can tell apart these two conditions. So in task A, the relative performance is better. In task B, the absolute performance is better. Now, and the dependent variable here was which of these feedbacks or tests actually they felt were more satisfying, and which test they thought was actually a better measure for their performance. So if we take a look at the data, and just so you remember, this is the task. So relative better is task A, absolute better is task B. Here, what you can see is that the satisfaction and the test evaluation in the condition where participants work together with their friend was always higher for the relative better task than the absolute better task. And in the stranger condition, it was actually the other way around. So satisfaction and test evaluation was lower for the relative better task than the absolute better task. So in other words, it seems like we care more about our relative standing with friends than when strangers are involved as partners. So if there's a friend involved, we care to be compared interpersonally more than absolutely, and if the stranger is involved, we care to be more scored more absolutely than relatively. Now, there was also information about self-esteem here, right? And remember that there were some low self-esteem and high self-esteem participants. And let's take a look at how their satisfaction and test evaluation differed depending on the self-esteem and the task type. And what you see is on the left, for the people who had lower self-esteem, they thought the test was worse in the relative better test than in the absolute better test. Compared to the highest self-esteem people, where the pattern was actually reverse. So you could say that low self-esteem participants were more satisfied and evaluated the test more positively on the absolute better task than on the relative better task, because they focused more on their own performance, while high self-esteem subjects were more satisfied and evaluated the test more positively on the relative better task than on the absolute better task. And they were kind of more focused on the performance relative to others. But you can hardly say anything about attention here, so that's a bit of a limitation.